Well, greetings, investors. Welcome to our November 7th edition of Turnout Tuesday. My name is Mark Robertson. I am founder and managing partner of Manifest Investing. I'm joined here by my colleague, Ken Kavula. Say hello, Ken.
Hi, how are you all?
And this is actually one of our favorite programs that we do at any time. We've been doing it for a number of years, but I just think this is just chock full of interesting ideas and topics for virtually everybody. So we'll be looking forward to just diving into that. Our email addresses are there on the screen for those of you who would like to either have follow-up questions or comments, or if you would like to request a copy of the slides, please feel free to contact either one of us. This program is co-sponsored by both Better Investing Mid-Michigan chapter and Manifest Investing. And again, welcome everybody. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. Again, you guys all know the rules. No investment recommendation whatsoever is intended. This is all about education. It is about the methods and techniques of the modern investment club movement, the investors that come together as partners of investment clubs, and those techniques. We're going to basically get into how we discover opportunity amongst the smaller, faster growing companies. Down at the bottom of that list, the webcast reminder list, if you want to be contacted via email with a reminder, nkavula1@comcast.net is Ken's better half, Natalie, nkavula1@comcast.net, and you can be added to be reminded. Again, everything here is for illustration and demonstration. So with that, Ken, why don't you go ahead and kick us off and give us a little historical context.
Well, quite a while ago, more than 10 years ago, we became fascinated by the Forbes Best Small Companies list. It was published every year just around Halloween, and it provided a wonderful source of ideas for not only Mark and myself, but for our community. The criteria were set pretty tightly for the Forbes list. They define small as having annual revenues of less than $1 billion. Most of you know that matches the target that Better Investing has decided defines a small company. On top of that, the Forbes list was looking for companies that had grown their sales at a number greater than or equal to 10% in the previous 12 months. They wanted revenues to not only be less than $1 billion, but they wanted revenues to exceed 50 million. So they cut out the micro companies from the list of possibilities. They also cut out a lot of the penny stocks. They said, let's look for companies with a stock price of greater than $5. So they kind of migrated away from the over-the-counter stocks and kind of stuck to stocks that were listed for the most part on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. They then were ranked by Forbes criteria, including things like financial strength and a proprietary conglomeration of 8 or 10 other numbers, and they excluded all asset-based companies from their list. That would be banks and insurance companies and a few other large categories that they kept off the list, feeling that it wasn't fair to compare an asset-based company like a bank to a manufacturing company or a services company. The Forbes list was about 200 companies long, and once that list came out, Mark and I would work real hard to try to distill that list down to what we felt was the best 30 or 40 or 50 companies on the list. And then we published that distillation of the 200 list. We published that distillation and we followed it for a year. We put in $100 on Halloween and then looked at the price, including dividend, at the next Halloween. And if it had risen to $150, for example, then we knew that it had made 50% during that particular year. So 3 years ago, Forbes decided it was going to stop publishing the list, and it was going to instead publish a list of unicorns, hence the picture at the bottom of the page. The list of unicorns, unfortunately, isn't very useful for investors like better investing investors. It's not very useful for retail investors for the most part, whether they ascribe to better investing principles or not. Unicorns are privately held companies that are just beginning their business history and are being funded by venture capitalists. Well, we don't have the capital as better investors, most of us don't, to put the kind of money into a privately held company that you'd have to do as a venture capitalist. So the list of unicorns, while interesting, didn't really help us too much in our investing. At that point, 3 years ago, Mark and I said, well, can't we do something with the Manifest Investing database? We have this database of quite a few companies. Can't we do something and pull out the best small companies, give a nod to the criteria from Forbes, and pull out what we think are the best 30 or 40 companies? So that's what we started to do 3 years ago. And tonight we're unveiling our list. Only one other practice audience has seen this list prior to you guys. And tonight we're going to show you our list of what we think are the 40 best small companies for the next year or so. So that said, let's move on to the next slide, and I'll let Mark do some talking for a while about this this performance that was going on that you see represented by the various bar graphs here.
Well, in a nutshell, it's pretty cool, really. The previous slide said we think we may have actually improved the process. I think we may have. Time will tell. But again, as the trick-or-treaters remind us, every year around Halloween, we go shopping for that list. We've been doing this. Actually, there's 10 years in front of this that we don't have on this slide. But going back to 2006, 2007, you can see that the tracking portfolio that we've put together has beaten the Wilshire 5000 in 9 out of 12 years. And we're particularly drawn to the right side of this picture because that's where we have been concentrating our efforts the last few years in the absence of and in the void created by Forbes magazine. Take a look at those returns for the last 3 years, 19%, 21.6, and 31.7. We like those numbers. That 31.7 comes in at about 8 percentage points better than the Wilshire 5000. And again, the reason we go into these companies in the first place is to provide that component of our portfolios that provides elevated growth and just promising young smaller companies to balance out our portfolios. So again, for this 12-year period where we've been doing this at Manifest Investing, the average annualized return of those red bars is 15.2% versus 10.3 for the Wilshire 5000. So we're basically operating at a 5 percentage point advantage to the market. So we think that's compelling.
What jumps out at me, Mark, on that slide before you get off of it also is that we go back to the wisdom of George Nicholson time and time and time again. When Nicholson was asked, why did you pick 5 points above the market? He said, because I thought you could do it. I thought a well-managed, well-reasoned group of folks sitting down could actually make that happen. And that's exactly what we're looking at here at the bottom. There's that 10% or thereabouts average over the long term for the entire stock market. And here we are showing a group of stocks that can beat that return by about 5 points over the long term. So I think that the goals that are set by Better Investing 70 plus years ago are still valid today. We just would like to refine them a little bit. And as you look year to year, we'd like to talk about beating the market by 5 points. But over long periods of time, that still is returning about 15% year over year over year on a market that returns about 10% during that same time period.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the stocks in the last year's 40. These are the top 10 strongest performing stocks. So again, keep in mind, as is demonstrated in the box down there, we invest $100 into each one. So $100 invested into Universal Display, ticker symbol OLED, $100 has become $283.62. we really love this one. This is one that Ken and I both brought to the roundtable. The motion was seconded or thirded by the audience. So the universal display is in the roundtable tracking portfolio, and pretty thrilled about that type of performance over that amount of time. Ken, anything else on this one jump off the page at you?
Yeah, what jumps out at me is that many of you have known that for 20 plus years, Natalie and I have been aiming to find small stocks that we can invest in. And we hold small stocks for as long as they make sense to do for. We're not afraid to sell a small stock if the story turns out to be not what we thought it was going to be. A good example of that would be the 3D printing company that we thought we were going to just put in the portfolio and forget. But it turns out we backed the wrong horse, and so we had to reevaluate some of our ideas about the company 3D printing, DDD. But I'm looking at this list of the top performers from last year, and I'm happy to say that two of them have been long-term holdings in my portfolio, Neogen and IPG Photonics. And then during the last 2 years, we added to our positions in Proto Labs, Align Technologies, and Universal Display. So when I can find that many stocks on the best list that I actually own, I know that these lists have power, and I know that they have contributed to the return in my own portfolio, and I'm certain that after suitable study that you can find some great ideas that perhaps will contribute to the return in your portfolio as well. Notice that all of those companies that I just indicated I own, none of them have PARs right now that, except maybe Proto Labs, that I would consider enticing enough to put new money into. But many of these companies have PARs that if you're considering them as core holdings, then the PAR is great. We consider Neogen to be a core holding in our portfolio. We've owned it for many, many, many years, and a PAR value of 9% when the market average is around 6%, we'll certainly take that. We just recently sold off about half of our holding in Align Technology at a extremely nice profit. You can see the 1 year return is 178%. Align Technologies is that company that makes the Invisalign braces, but a lot of folks don't know that they also make the cheaper cousin to Invisalign that you can order through the mail and essentially begin to do tooth straightening yourself by mail order with the types of mouth guards that are sent to you at various times. I really like IPG Photonics, and that's another company that we think is a core holding. I discovered it because my dad was a machinist, and this is a machining company, an old-fashioned machining company using really new-fashioned technology to turn machining jobs over in very, very short periods of time and get those parts out basically on demand, especially when engineers are trying to build prototypes, trying to build models of what it is they want to build huge quantities of later in the future. So I'm just all in on the idea that this list of 40 stocks that we're going to show you can really be a heavy-duty list of great ideas.
I'd like
Mark, did you have something to add? Go on.
I'd just like to translate what you've been talking about here. It sounds to me like you're buying dinner.
Buying dinner, okay.
Well, yeah.
I'd be happy to do that for you and Wendy, not for the whole audience, but you name the date, and Natalie and I'll have the two of you out for dinner, okay?
No, the one thing I would, before we leave this slide, I would point out again, the average quality rating of these stocks is 82.6, and that's one of the points we've been trying to make, and we'll make it even more strongly here in a minute, that quality matters with small companies, perhaps even more than the larger companies. So let's go ahead and take a look at the list of companies that didn't do quite so well. These are the 10 weakest performers in the portfolio. And just a couple of things, these are not all bad companies. There's some very good companies here. They just had a little bit of weakness over the prior year. You can see that community favorite eGov is down about $20. But the thing I really like to point out is, again, that $100 invested in all 10 of these, which would be $1,000 invested, is worth about $653. note that the gains from just those top 2 stocks on the previous page more than offsets these. And again, I put losses in quotes on purpose from these 10. You still have $15 left after covering for the 10 stocks. So what's really kind of cool about that is some of these may have had some weakness, but the advances made by the stronger stocks just so completely offsets. That's how you get that 31% return. Um, there's still companies on here that'll make this year's list, like eGov and Chewy's Holdings and a couple of the others. But one of the things that we have been working on, notice that the average quality ranking of these 10 weaker stocks is 70.2. And Ken and I have been looking more carefully at quality drift, whatever you want to call it, a downward decline in quality as time goes by as being a selling trigger, or certainly a selling analysis trigger. And if your company is weakening when it comes to the quality, it's something we're going to be looking at creating a selling discipline moment.
You
Anything?
know, Mark, I did send a trial balloon past the other half of my investing partnership here. That what would you think about opening an account in Folio and putting a couple $100 into each stock in the top 400? You know, you can do that with practically no fees attached when you do it in Folio, and you can buy those fractional shares and everything. And if it does really return as well as it has in the past 3 years, then that should be a really good investment. But I was vetoed that I was not going to start to run a mutual fund, that I already had enough stocks in our portfolios, and I was not going to start to follow a list of 40 that we owned on top of that. So I still think it's an intriguing idea, however, for the long term.
I can honestly see. We'll take a look at the list at the end of the presentation. I could actually see doing that just as a, these results here speak for themselves. There's no guarantees in the world of investing, but over the that's compelling. I mean, I could see taking the top 20 or so and maybe doing what you just described. All right, let's go ahead and press on and talk about, well, what are we doing differently here? And again, I'll just go and reinforce that it's trick or treat season. That's just our reminder. The 3 graphs up at the top, one of those is Neogen. I don't know which one, but they're basically all up, straight, and parallel. And we are allowed to chant that around here. And again, this notion of quality really matters, even for small companies, perhaps even more importantly for small companies. And there's also this myth of small companies have to be roller coasters. And I would defy you. Those are not roller coasters. Those are well-managed companies that show a genuine, strong, excellent characteristics. And that's the way we look at this situation. You can find another Neogen. I mean, when you think about the companies over the last 10 years, like the BioReference Labs and the Maximuses, and there's just literally dozens of companies that some of them have actually been bought up and acquired by other companies, just have served us well. It can be done. So again, just reinforcing, sticking very much with criteria that's very close to the Forbes criteria. We want double-digit sales growth. We also said, 1 billion is a pretty decent number. We don't want the companies to get too big. We did provide a little bit of latitude. If they're slightly over a billion, we allowed them. We don't have a hard line in the sand or anything like that. So we said some latitude there. Again, we want to stay away from the really, really small micro caps, and nothing really got terribly close to that. Avoid the penny stocks for all the reasons that everybody knows. And then we decided that an asset-based business could be allowed to sneak in. It's going to be rare, though, because the fact of the matter is that most asset-based businesses are going to have lower growth rates. I mean, the average asset-based business is probably a mid-single-digit growth rate. They're not going to make this list very often, but a couple of them actually did threaten, and you'll see that one actually did make it. And then the biggest change we made, we defined best as an excellent company at a good price, an excellent company on sale with a superior return forecast. So we use manifest rank, a combination of those 2 most important characteristics, as our primary criteria.
I'll tell you also, Mark, that the most exciting thing that I've found in investing is to discover a small stock, a very small stock that has excellent respectable earnings and consistent growth in revenues, and then to own it for a long, long period of time so that it becomes a major, large stock in your portfolio. I've owned Cognizant Technology now for close to 20 years, and it was discovered as a small stock, and we've ridden that stock and let it split and ridden it some more, and it's proved to be one of the best investments I ever made. I'll give you one more example. We bought Electronic Arts when it was an extremely small stock, a gaming stock, and then we sold it 5 or 6 years later after it exploded. We also bought a stock called NetEase in one of our clubs, and it's proved to be the backbone of one of our club's portfolios. It's a Chinese stock. It's an ADR, but it's based on the internet gaming idea in China, and it's proved to be a wildly successful purchase, starting as a very, very small stock as well. So that's really exciting to me when you can take a list like that, find a stock, and then be able to hold on to it for as long as it makes sense. And in some of my holdings, it's made sense for 15 or 18 or 20 years. So that's one of the other things I'm looking for when I look at these lists as well.
Well, that's a great lead-in, Ken, because one of the places or sources of ideas we're going to talk about here in a minute is ideas if you want to start throwing tickers around, FactSet Research. I mean, Rich Bobian whispered to me in the rain at the Yankee chapter many years ago up in New England. And it's just these type of companies, a lot of times they come to us from our friends. That's what we'll talk about here. Source of some of the ideas that percolated and ended up some fresh ideas. When we talk about investing and seeking small companies for study, we've covered many of these sources in the past. We still love to grab a copy of the Hoover's Emerging Company Handbook. Again, it can be a year or two old, doesn't matter. Pick it up secondhand for a couple bucks and you can get some ideas. We love, and we're going to actually show a couple examples of this, funds who seem to know what they're doing and shopping within their portfolio for new ideas for stocks to study. The barn raising is exactly that, a tribute to the stuff Ken was just talking about, people who bring ideas. We see it on our chapter visits where we'll discover an obscure company in a portfolio. I think of II-VI, almost 20 years ago in Pittsburgh, and Mesa Labs out in Colorado. And we discover these companies and can be the type of company that makes a tremendous difference. David Gardner for the stuff he does with some of his rule-breaking portfolios. And then Chris Jenner we'll talk about in a second. But you see here are some of the funds that we have actually gone into and checked for some new ideas. Chris Jenner used to run the T. Rowe Price Health Sciences Fund. He had an absolutely fantastic track record. He's now running a private equity firm called Rock Springs Capital Management, but you can still keep track of the stocks that he is following on a couple of different websites. But again, some of these small company funds can be very powerful sources of ideas. And then the people. Matt Spielman brought us Stamps.com not that long ago, and the stock selection contests. Bank of the Internet, all of those type of companies, club portfolios will discover an undiscovered stock. And again, you guys bring us some really great ideas. Let's spend a moment just talking about this notion of finding people who know what they're doing and then looking over their shoulders. You've seen us do these demonstrations at some of our educational sessions. Our favorite small company funds are listed here. The reason we do is because they are successful in what they do, and they tend to specialize in the area of discovering small, faster-growing companies. So the value that you see in the center column here is $100 invested 10 years ago. So $100 invested 10 years ago in the Prime Cap Odyssey Aggressive Growth Fund, you see the ticker symbol right here, is now worth almost $400. That's a 14% return over the last decade, when the market's gone up about 8% over that last decade. So sorted from top to bottom, these are market-beating returns from all the companies at the top. We tend to be drawn to the funds here that have the higher growth numbers. The growth rate of the average company in Brown Capital is actually 13.6%. It's a collection of less than 40 companies with extremely low turnover. tremendous conviction on the stuff that they buy. They'll buy stuff and hold it for years. Can be some very interesting ideas. Wasatch is another that has decent growth and that we do like to pay some attention to. So does Conestoga. So again, you can dive into these funds, look for some ideas. We'll look at some names here in a second. We did just add one of the ETFs put out by First Trust in Chicago, Small Cap Core, because they have beaten the market over that time frame and earned a position on the slot. Some of you will also remember that Buffalo Small Cap used to be at the top of this list, and then they kind of blew a head gasket when Kent Gasaway left, and or at least he's doing some other things and has been kind of distracted. Their performance was miserable for several years, and they now do seem to be kind of regaining their steps, and at least they're looking at some real growth companies. So everybody above the yellow line is beating the market. Those below the VTSMX there are underperforming the market. Wasatch kind of on the hot seat a little bit in the penalty box perhaps, and Pennsylvania Mutual is just kind of a reminder that every once in a while you'll run into what is touted as a small company fund. It really is small cap, and we can see that this very low growth rate tells me all I need to know. It's probably dominated by distressed merchandise, small cap companies, and you can see there's just a whole lot here not to like about this one. These guys are definitely in the penalty box, and I'm not sure they're coming out anytime soon. So you can actually keep a running tab on these companies using that link on the bottom of the page. That is a public link, so you can follow along and dive into these funds and follow some of the holdings. Any comments, Ken, or should we press on?
No, let's press on, Mark. Okay.
All right. Every week at Manifest we do an update, and I just thought I would share. This is actually the companies were added just in the last week or so. In some cases, it is coverage just being restored. These are not all small companies. In fact, the Twinkie rising from the ashes like a phoenix is right there. Hostess Brands. That is Twinkie. So that doesn't qualify as a small company, but the three that are highlighted in that you can see in the middle section here, LeMaitre, Vascular, PRA Health Sciences, and Kingstone. As I was going through them, they just kind of jumped off the page, so those are actually active links from our update to those companies. And in fact, 2 out of the 3 actually made our 40. But as you kind of leaf through those names, I know that there's names on there that are new to you because most of them are new to me, and I do a lot of this stuff. So ELF Beauty down at the bottom there, that could be an interesting one to compare to Ulta Beauty. But
I love that you called out Twinkie brands, Mark. I'm one of the few former high school principals in the nation that can boast of having 2 former students on the Forbes richest men or richest people in the world list. 2 of my students are on that list. And they were the ones that went out and bought the Twinkie brand and bought the Hostess brand and pulled it out of that despair that Hostess Twinkies had found itself in and recreated the company and then pushed it public. They're both venture capitalists, and they were the ones to push Twinkie public. So I'm so glad that we're covering it now in the database. Everybody should have a good snowball or a good Twinkie now and then, you know?
Good health food, yep. So there's a number of companies here that you can just kind of run them through. They're not all going to look good. And this reminder is more of a warning than a reminder. Some of these are not core companies, and they're not the type of company that you're going to be very comfortable with. And just wanted to remind a little bit about that. They can be dramatically rewarding, but sometimes they are early stage. So let's talk a little bit about that before we launch into our 40. Some of them actually fit this bill. What I've done is I'll put up just simply a life cycle curve for companies with some stages. There's 5, actually 6 stages here shown for the average company. You guys all know this. I mean, as a company is born and starts up in stage 1, they go through a period where the revenues are starting to pick up some steam, but there's no earnings. Hugh McManus is notorious for bringing us companies, from somewhere in this stage where you try to do a stock selection guide and there's no E line, there's no blue line for earnings. Well, somewhere in that second stage of young growth, they actually do have this emerging moment where they break through and start making a profit. Sales are going up, earnings begin to be positive, and life is good. These two sections here, stage 3 and stage 4, is where we do most of our investing. Most of the core companies that we have, this is where up, straight, and parallel lives. This is up, straight, and parallel, during those two phases of a company lifetime. And then other companies like Hershey and others will go into this much, even you could even say the same is true for Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They end up in this area where the growth isn't that exciting, but it's still very strong companies. And then from there on, they're either going to be mature stalwarts or a company that goes into a state of decline. Those two type of things. The thing we want to remember here is some of the companies on this list, we use the goldfish analogy just again as one of those other reminders that, again, a goldfish like that in a fish bowl like that will not get much bigger during its lifetime. But if you allow that goldfish to escape into a small pond, sometimes they become like 80-pound, I call them carp, because that's what they are, but they become these huge, once they've been set free and they're able to get more food than they need and grow outside of this boundary, they actually become very large fish. Well, sometimes the fish jumps out of the fish bowl and was happy in the fish bowl. It could stay that size its entire lifetime, but sometimes it jumps out and it lands on dry land. And that's just not a pretty sight. I do want to say that no animals were made in the making of this slide or this presentation tonight, but that's what you got to be mindful of. And for that reason, we want to draw your attention to what happens if a company does emerge, looks like they're going to make profits for a while, and then they go back into this zone. And the answer is they get punished. They get punished severely, because if the earnings go back negative, you have some severely disappointed, in many cases, big investors, and it can be quite detrimental to the company. So I think we have a couple of companies that are potential examples of that here tonight. A lot of times a company like a biotech, or it could be any company in any field, but a biotech is a great example. If they disappoint and go back negative, it's brutal to the company. This material was taken from the blog that you see down there at the bottom. He is a professor of finance at one of the New York universities, and there is some pretty entertaining stuff here, but I just thought this captured moments during the life cycle of a company, the reminder about where the up, straight, and parallel lives, and again, this notion of early stage investing and how it has to be treated differently and respected, possibly with a higher degree of vigilance in the stuff that people like Hugh McManus do, and I try to do, but not as successfully as Hugh. Any comments to any of this, or things that we should reinforce here, Ken?
No, but I would like to clear up a few questions before we move on, Mark. Annie would like to know, what do the asterisks mean next to the names of some of the companies that we're featuring tonight?
Well, the asterisk simply means that it's not in the value line standard edition. So there's approximately 1,700 companies in the standard edition. Any company with an asterisk means that it's not among those.
Okay, thank you. And then Annie and Jane would both like to know, what exactly are asset-based companies? And could we give some examples of asset-based companies?
All right. Well, an asset-based company, quite simply, is most banks, most insurance companies, where the business model, and that's what you want to key in on, the business model is to build a pile of money and then basically extract a management fee from it. So, again, a bank or an insurance company is going to build this mountain of money, and then they're going to make 1% or 1.5% on the total pile of money. So it really is a statement that's reflective of the business model itself. So if that's the type of company we're dealing with, again, it's not so much revenues that matter as that pile of assets, or literally dollars, that they can extract an operating or management fee from.
And again, the best examples would be all banks and almost all insurance companies, reinsurance companies as well. So there's a huge sector of companies that are basically asset-based. When you look at the financial sector, you will find companies that are not asset-based. A good example would be a Visa or a MasterCard or a Brown & Brown. But for the most part, anything in the financial sector probably is classified as an asset-based company. Annie would like to know, are there handouts or copies of the presentation? Annie, we put all of our presentations up on YouTube, and we also post them on the Manifest Investing site. The YouTube channel is Manifest Investing Roundtable. We don't have a separate channel right now for Turnout, but if this program is successful enough and lasts for as long as Roundtable, maybe we'll give it its own channel. For the moment, however, you can find all of the roundtables and all of the Turnout sessions on the Manifest Investing Roundtable channel, and you can subscribe to that channel, go directly to all of these presentations, and then choose which one you'd like to listen in. Mark, John would like you to make a guess at which stage you think Apple is in on this chart right now.
Oh boy, I think Apple's kind of in the on the right-hand side, only they are blending in some of stage 2 and stage 3 to remain viable. So they're an average of 2 and 6, I suppose.
I'll make a guess, and I'd put it at stage 5 right now, but Apple has demonstrated the ability to kind of back up along this graph at various times, and I've watched Apple for maybe 25 years now, and I've seen it at various times move up so that it's at stage the end game stage, and then suddenly it's back down to stage 2 or stage 3 again. And Apple is so focused on recreating itself with the products that it develops and then sells, so that it has the ability to kind of recycle itself along this graph, and it's done it a number of different times. Mark has a beautiful slide that shows a long-term view of Apple for the last 20, 25, 30 years, and we see these peaks and valleys of excessively high growth followed by no growth of any kind, no earnings of any kind, followed by high growth again. So picking a place on this chart for a company as interesting, that's a good word to use, as interesting as Apple, I think is extremely difficult.
Questions clear for now?
I think our questions are clear, so let's move on, okay?
All right, let's go ahead and dive into the 40 companies. And what I've done here is, we'll give you the list of all 40 when we're done, but what I've done here is divided into pieces of 8 in honor of when stock prices were priced in eighths. Anybody remember those days? So let's go ahead and take a look at these are the bottom 8 on the list, but keep in mind these are the 40 among the 40 best. So these are not bad companies. These are good and excellent companies. And we see starting from number 33 at Ollie's Bargain all the way down to 40 Neogen. And what we thought we would do is just kind of grab a couple of these as they kind of pique our interest or our attention. And Ken, why don't you start with some comments on Neogen?
Well, I love this stock. I've owned this stock for years. We discovered it in mid-Michigan in an investors fair in the late 90s. So that means that about 20 years now that I've owned Neogen. It stayed a small company during that entire time. It's a very small, friendly company. In fact, their annual meeting is a picnic, and they invite all their shareholders to come to East Lansing, where they're headquartered, and join them in a picnic on the grounds of their administration building. Neogen began as a rodenticide company, and one of their first big products was developing things that could keep a cow's udder sterile. They've since moved to some pretty high-tech instrumentation, most of it dealing with food safety. They have tests that you can run as a restaurateur for peanut residue. They have tests that you can run for listeria and for E. coli bacteria. And they're very much niche players, and they make no secret about the fact that they look for niches where the big guys don't want to play. They look for niches that aren't profitable for the big players, and then they try to fill those niches as fully as they can. Fortunately, there's a lot of those kind of places that companies like Neogen can move to, and they've been wildly successful. Do I think this is necessarily a buy right now? Well, it has a pretty decent par. going forward. 8% in a 6% market means that I'm not going to get rid of this core holding, but I don't think it would show up as a buy on your stock selection guide at this particular time. And I think the PE value might be a little scary for some of you as well. This high quality company has been discovered by the market for the last 10 or 11 years, and it carries a very, very lofty PE value to go with its extremely strong, consistent growth, both in revenues and in sales. Revenues and earnings. It hardly ever disappoints on a quarter-to-quarter basis. And when it does disappoint, we're only talking usually about a penny or two. It's very predictable. They're extremely good corporate citizens. And if you own it, I certainly would pat yourself on the back, and I see no reason that I would get rid of my Neogen holdings, and I continually watch it. In the last 3 or 4 years, there have been a couple of times that if you're willing to pay a elevated PE, then you can buy the company at a fair price in a couple of different times in the last 3 or 4 years. So that's Neogen, number 40 on the list.
Yeah, and again, those PEs are going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable. Keep in mind, we're talking about, even though they're extremely well behaved, this is still an early stage company, and I would direct everybody's attention back to the early days of Paychex, and we remember that we saw similar PE ratios for Paychex, and the reality is that this remains a viable company, standalone, going forward. That PE will come down eventually. Don't expect it to be quite as sudden with Neogen as you might have with the average company because of that long-term consistency. But yeah, the PE is coming down in the future. It's just a matter of who knows when. And I think the Paychex.
I get the question.
Go ahead, Ken.
I get the question all the time, Mark, about, well, what happens if somebody buys it? And my answer always is, well, I'm going to be extremely pleased.
Sure.
They will buy this company at a huge premium. And I'll make a nice, tidy profit to end up my holding that I've held for lots and lots of years. And it's not a child. I won't be upset if it leaves the nest through purchase or through my own sales at some point. But up to this point, I have seen no reason at all to sell this company, and I continue to hold it.
And I'm guessing that you don't need to say, but your cost basis is probably 5 or less. So.
That's pretty small.
That's pretty much handles it. Well, one of the companies that kind of jumped off the page for me is this Lemater Vascular. They're out of Burlington, Massachusetts. They've been around for about 30 years or so now. And this is just what you think it is, vascular disease treatment, repairing arteries and making people healthier. It's a medical device company. It is a company that appeared in places like Kris Jenner's current portfolio, along with a couple of the leaders. I believe it was in the Prime Cap Odyssey portfolio. And I do know that Brown Small Cap has been tracking one of the competitors of this company. So it's an interesting area. Notice that there are a couple of things missing. We really don't have a whole lot of information about how the company performed during the last recessions. So that is something to think about. But this is another company that is being discovered. The earnings line is strong. And again, as we go through these, some of these numbers are fairly small and sharp. Focus your attention on the business model or the visual analysis, because you can see everything almost that you need to see there. This is a company that, again, we know that stock prices follow earnings, and the earnings are headed in the right direction, and so is the top line. So there's a fairly compelling story, and I would dig in a little bit deeper. I mean, I think that I would have to spend a little more time studying this company than perhaps even Neogen, but at number 38 on the list with a 12% growth rate and return forecasts in the low teens and a decent, good quality rating, it's compelling. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the next set of eight pieces of eight. And I guess I'll take this one, Ken.
Okay, great.
Caesarstone. This is one that we like this company. Susan Michalik, one of our guest damsels for the roundtable, did bring this back a couple of years ago. I think it's a well-positioned company. They make high quality quartz surface products, this engineered quartz stuff that is basically unseating granite. And I mean, every house that I know of in this area has had new counters, except for mine, installed. And maybe we'll look at Caesar stone, but that's what they do. They make a very high quality product, a little more costly, but really good stuff. Susan made an excellent presentation about it when she brought it back during our annual awards show back a couple of years ago. And I do think this is an example of a company that I think will find its footing. It's speculation at this point, but the earnings line has flattened. The top line that you can see up here at the top continues to behave quite well. So if these guys can get their act together in a market that has high potential in the refurbishment and the building of home building in general, there's a lot, as John Kimmel likes to say, this is at a pretty good spot on the runway when it comes to home building and home improvement. But the fact that these guys have had this flat spot, I really think that they're an example of what happens when, for a company that has just emerged and begun making positive earnings, when they disappoint for a while, we see this sort of thing happen here. The stock price has been punished. It's been absolutely punished, but you can see the price bars are down. If they get their act together and if they stabilize at really decent earnings, could have some fairly interesting days ahead. So it's a good study.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll wave a red flag about this company, Mark. We just recently put quartz countertops in our kitchen, and the competition in this market is very, very heavy duty. Our supplier indicated that there were a number of different suppliers, and the price differentials between the different suppliers was more than you might expect from supplier to supplier. So there's heavy duty competition in this quartz countertop area with a lot of private companies that have moved into the space. So that might be part of the problem Caesarstone is having right now.
So it's a good element for a study, and you're saying it's hard rock. All right. All right, we'll go ahead to number 25 on the list, and this one is no stranger to many of us, NIC, ticker symbol EGOV. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, well, what I'd like to point out when you're looking at the visual analysis here is that Manifest Investing likes to meld or merge into our data the two forward-looking years, and these are based on analyst consensus opinions. So Mark has just circled the fact that the last two dots on this graph have not yet happened. They're 2017 and 2018 analyst consensus opinions. And what's going on with eGov right now is that they're having a dispute with one of their largest customers. eGov basically sets up internet portals for states. And eGov was having no problems at all dealing with these portals in smaller states, but they went after one of the big states, Texas. There's 5 or 6 states that you consider having huge amounts of business. Texas is one of them. And things were going swimmingly for the portals in Texas. And then Texas got the idea that it might be able to run these portals by itself, that it didn't need eGov to actually make the portals run the way they were supposed to run. Well, it turns out that the contracts that eGov gave to the different states did allow the state to opt out and keep the portal open, but they would not have any maintenance to that portal once eGov moved away from the contract. Right now, we're looking at the idea that eGov might lose this Texas contract, and if it does, that's a significant part, upwards to 20% of its business. If that happens, then of course earnings are going to flatten out. Sales will probably flatten a little bit as well. eGov is moving very aggressively to add other contracts to its stable to lessen the impact if Texas does pull out. And the decision has yet to be made. The analysts are obviously betting on the worst case scenario, and eGov is cautiously pessimistic about what's going to be happening, but I don't think they've given up by any means on what Texas will finally end up doing. So it's one to watch. If Texas contract stays as part of eGov's business, then these last 2 years are going to be significantly different from the dots that we see right now, and that should give a real jump start to the price of the company again. So if you do choose to invest in this company, you're going to want to pay very close attention. I also think that the renewal of the Texas contract will probably boost that PE ratio towards the right-hand side of the blue graphs on the bottom, and you will begin to see that trend line either stabilize at horizontal or maybe even start to move up in the other direction again. All in all, it's an interesting situation that's going on, and it's the kind of thing that can happen to very small companies. And because of the limited amount of revenue that they really have, a single customer can many times make a huge difference in what the small company is going to perform at. So be careful if you're investing in this one, but do know the story. And do know that at Manifest, these two forward-looking dots are yet to happen. They're estimates. They're not definite data points, as you might see from some data feeds.
But they are influencing the stock price. Has been flat for a little while.
Absolutely. What the analysts think matters, even if they're wrong, because they represent such a huge part of the market. So right now the analysts are pessimistic, and they are influencing the stock price, as you can see from the price bars that have begun to flatten out.
All right, let's press on. We don't want to be too long. Again, with our screening results here, we're seeing some fairly interesting stuff. I really like this one. I'm taking this one, Ken. This is Prestige Brands. Okay. Ticker symbol PBH, number 17 on our list. Decent growth, 14% growth, decent returns, decent outlook for the year ahead. But I figure I don't know anything about this company until I learned I know everything about this company. These guys are Chloraseptic, Dramamine, my wife is a Dramamine customer, Compound W, Efferdent for dentures, Ludens for cough drops, Pediacare for my grandsons, Murine for earwax and eye stuff. What else do they got? They've got...
well, don't forget about Spick and Span and Comet.
I'm getting to that down at the bottom. I mean, this is the foundation of the company. Spick and Span and Comet. So, I mean, the new company that's described here was founded in 1996. They're obviously a collector of stuff that works and people need. I think that's kind of cool. And Ken tells me that the original company that predates the current company was originally Spick and Span. I don't remember that, but he's older than I am, so he remembers that kind of stuff.
I'm much older.
So anyhow, I know what the pieces are now. Now you look at the graph, you see up, straight, and parallel. The thing that is compelling to me is I've always wanted to have a piece of Kimberly-Clark or Clorox or some of these other companies, WD-40. They never seem to be attractive or on sale, and I'd have to really bend to own them. Well, here's one looking back at me. I know the pieces, and it's compelling. It's compelling as all get out. And you see improving margins. You might actually put it through the same type of analysis that we talked about for Church and Dwight here a few months ago that shows that type of improving profitability picture on the net margin is an important component. PE ratio is strong, up, straight, and parallel. And this one's a worthy study, and I'm going to be raking this one over the coals.
I also think it's kind of unfair, Mark, to have it classified as a drug company.
I do too.
I think maybe it better fits into some of our consumer staple companies, and the very ones that you mentioned, the Cloroxes and the Procter and Gamble's and the Kimberly-Clarks. It might be a better fit for this particular company.
I'll make that shift. I did not make that industry assignment, so that came from somebody else. So I will make that shift, and I think it's going to fare well. F-A-R-E, well, even in that different environment.
All right. Oh, I agree with you. Right. Here's another company that I happen to own in one of the clubs that I belong to. It's called Dorman Products. It's an auto parts aggregator and a partial maker of different auto parts. They operate in the aftermarket. They assemble kits. So if you want to rebuild your transmission, for example, or your carburetor, Dorman Products probably has a kit for it. They do sell to individuals, but their major customers are very small businesses, small single-person or dual-person auto body shops and things like that. And I found this stock originally at one of the the sessions that Mark and I do throughout the country, somebody brought up the name, and I really liked the visual analysis, so I did some work on it, brought it to my club, and we ended up purchasing it. Notice that as people have discovered it, the PE ratio has moved in an upward direction. The net margins seem to be moving in the right direction. And again, a company that I'm not especially confident about as being a buy today on an SSG, but a company that has been a buy as recently as a year ago. So I would look at it carefully, study some of its competitors. A very interesting way for an auto parts company to operate, and very different from the people that operate stores like O'Reilly or AutoZone or something like that. So give Dorman Products a look, and maybe look at a few partial competitors to Dorman. LKQ springs to mind, although they're getting their parts. LKQ is from a whole different kind of source, but they're still selling parts to the aftermarket. So take a good look at it. It's a very interesting stock, Dorman Products.
All right, we'll move on before you start to get nostalgic about Gentex. All right. All right, well, here's the one bank that snuck onto it. And again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time other than to point out it's up straight and parallel. It's kind of a community favorite, Signature Bank, ticker symbol SBNY. It ends up at the number 15 slot on this year's list. The reason it gets there is double-digit growth. It doesn't pay a dividend. Fairly young situation with fairly controlled geographic expansion. They do some slightly different type of lending, including taxi cabs and that kind of stuff. So you want to study that and understand what some of the pressures involved there are. But we do see up straight and parallel. The one thing we do differently at Manifest is we chart book value instead of sales on top of earnings, so that the difference between the two lines is return on equity. But it's still a valid way. It's the way Warren Buffett takes a look at financial companies. And very compelling story unfolding here. For more on this one, I'm going to actually refer you to Eddie Elfenbein at crossingwallstreet.com. It's one of his buy list favorites, and he has quite often he's updating specifically what is happening at Signature Bank. So I would point you guys there. Let's go ahead, and Ken, do you want to say a few words about Mercado Libre?
I really like. Mark and I have been pushing Mercado Libre since a trip that we took up to Minneapolis about 10 years ago. It was a hot stock at that point. It's an Argentinian stock, and you can think of it as equivalent to maybe a combination of eBay with a little bit of Amazon thrown in, and maybe even a little bit of Google thrown into the whole mix. They operate mainly in South America, and that's one of the big negatives to the company, because you know that South American currencies many times are basket cases, and you have to let that play into the growth of the company. But it's certainly a fast grower. It certainly looks really nice on a visual analysis. And right now, the prognostication for the company is a really good par value, somewhere in the low 20s. And I would definitely take a look at this highly reputable and very responsible internet company from South America. Don't confuse the currency being a basket case with the company being a basket case. The company seems to be able to turn sales into a nice, consistent growth pattern, and then do the same thing with earnings that tend to follow those sales.
Yeah, and the one feature that I like to point everybody to is the scalability of the business that really bodes well for the future profitability of this company. You can see that it looks like maybe they've turned that long-term trend, and they actually probably are headed back the other way as the scalability. That's what you want to study when you look at the company. Basically, every incremental dose of revenues goes straight to the bottom line and improves that profitability. So good stuff there. All right, let's go ahead with our second to last company. We are up into the top 8 now. This one has been this is one of the top performing companies for this year. It stays on the list. It was number 19 last year, number 7 this year, Stamps.com. I don't know. I have not studied it in any great detail, but people like Matt Spielman have brought this and pointed out the company, and Matt does awesome analytical work for the clubs and the the sessions that we have here, both at the round table and some of the local events going on in the area. So I have a lot of trust and confidence in Matt. And what these guys are is they're very important to small and medium-sized businesses for delivering stuff. You can see that it's definitely a kind of an up straight and parallel with 1 year. There's an event in 2015 I would work to understand. But again, they have a lot of competition, a lot of stuff to understand about the company. But as it stands right now, they have skyrocketed. They have huge expectations for the next year and beyond. So you want to come to some judgment and understanding about how feasible and how viable that is. But just generally well positioned across the board, and take a closer look at it. So with that, we'll come to our number one company.
The last one we're going to look at is Cambrex Corporation. And Mark and I have been doing an awful lot of traveling the last couple of months. And about 2 months ago, I was on my own in Denver, Colorado, and we were doing portfolio reviews for a number of clubs. And I noticed that 3 or 4 of the clubs had this Cambrex in their portfolio, and it wasn't being covered by Manifest at that point. So I asked Mark to put it into the coverage, and meanwhile I began to do a little bit of research on it, and then I was quite surprised and very pleased when, lo and behold, it ends up being number 1 on our list for the next 12 months. Cambrex is kind of a hard to understand company until you realize that they're manufacturing things on the molecular level. They're not making things that you can hold a single one of them in your hand. Well, I guess you can. It's a molecule. But they're making small molecules for different drug companies, for pharmaceutical research companies. And these molecules then are used to create the drugs that have been discovered so that there's enough of the drug to run through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 drug trials. Small molecules are in again. That's a quote right from the Cambrex website. And they feel that their certification as a high quality manufacturer of these molecules really serves them well. The roundtable in October, I presented a fairly lengthy presentation on Cambrex, so you can go back to the October roundtable. Again, we're on YouTube, Manifest Investing Roundtable channel on YouTube, and you can listen to my presentation then. But I think this is a compelling story right now for this company, and I think that in fact you probably would find that this is close to a buy or a buy on a well-reasoned, sophisticated, conservative stock selection guide. I like this idea about selling things that I can't even see with the naked eye, and I like the fact that they are putting a huge amount of money into certifying themselves to make the highest quality things that can be made. That puts them in the top tier of worldwide manufacturers, and that's been one of the driving forces behind the increase in business over the last 5 or 6 years.
Good stuff. So let's hope for bright days ahead for Cambrex. All right, let's go ahead and close things down. We just want to summarize by pointing out that good, small, promising companies are an incremental, urgently important part of your portfolios, and you got to always be searching for them. That's why we love this annual effort. You saw the results, you saw the numbers. These are the type of companies that you can probably do some sniffing around and add companies that will keep your overall portfolio growth forecast at that 11%, give or take a percent or two, and you definitely want to try to be there. And we hope that you find interesting ideas. Please feel free to write and comment. The link down at the bottom is the actual active list of our 20 favorites from this list. And Ken, I think I will look into investing in some type of passive 20 stocks at once alternative with real dollars, just to make a point. And I think that would be a great thing to do. And again, we think run it by your partner to make sure you don't get a veto like I did, Mark. Okay. Well, I'm persuasive and she likes me, but sometimes she can be kind of a stick in the mud. So we'll give.
I know. I've heard that you get vetoed sometimes. So
I know she won't let me take out a home equity loan to do this. So. Anyhow,
I'm following our question log right now, and we do have a few questions. So if you give me just a moment to get this open and take a look, okay? Paula wants to know, at the end of the show, can you give an update on the Yahoo pricing issue? What's going on with Yahoo and pricing in 3 sentences or less without anything nasty, Mark, okay?
without anything nasty, oh, that's not easy to do. What literally happened is Verizon bought Yahoo several months ago. I don't even remember when. And they had a policy change. Yahoo had actually allowed companies to come in and use basically a free pricing option to harvest stock prices for websites like ours, and we're not alone. It impacted Toolkit, and it impacted Investment Account Manager and hundreds of other financial websites. And they did this without telling us. They slammed the door shut, so basically shutting down any of the automatic stuff that takes care of our price updates. We are working on fixing it with a long-term solution. If it were just the stock prices alone, we'd be done already. But some of the other stuff that we use, like for our Eagles, our equity analysis guides, and that kind of stuff is also disrupted. So Kurt is working to not just put a Band-Aid on it, but actually do a long-term repair and do some upgrading along the way. So we will be taking a closer look at it. Hopefully that answers your question. We're probably a couple of days away from implementing that type of a thing. In the absence of a solution, we will do a price update, standalone price update also.
Okay, we got a question from Jaya, and she says, what does the ACE represent? ACE stands for Analyst Consensus Estimates, and there are a number of different sources where you can get different ACE numbers, but basically it's a group of analysts whose numbers are averaged together to give you a single value, and we're using ACE values from, what's our data source for ACE this time, Mark, do you know?
Yahoo.
We're using Yahoo ACE numbers, and as much as Mark is in love with Yahoo right now, we might be changing that in the near future. Bonnie would like us to comment on Forward Air. Bonnie, we just don't have enough on our plates to follow every single stock that exists, and if you'll ask us to take a look at Forward Air at the roundtable coming up on the last Tuesday of this month, we'll be glad to take a look at it in the question time. My wife is correcting me. It's the 21st. Mark, do you have something to say about Forward Air? Go on.
I was just going to say I have a nutshell comment to make. Both Heartland and Forward Air. By the way, Forward Air has made this list for like 12 years running. They just barely went over $1 billion in sales, and we allowed them to stay on the list. We consider them to be pretty well managed. One of the things that you're seeing in that entire industry is a slew of acquisition activity. And that's driven up the stock prices of many of these companies. So there's some speculation that these companies will be acquired built into the stock prices. So you want to tread carefully in that sector right now, or that industry group that has to do with trucking.
Okay, Laura is telling us that Prestige Brands is featured in this week's Value Line Special Situations report, and you might want to take a look at it. And she's saying that they have a $75 price target for the next decade. So I don't know if that helps anybody decide about that. We're getting a comment from Susan Micholik in Wisconsin that SBNY price is sure to go up because she just sold her shares today. So if you're a person that follows what Susan does, Susan sold, and she says that's a buy opportunity for the rest of us. Okay,
I'm on it.
From Kay, she says that a lot of the business that was going to Cambrex came from Gilead, but not anymore. And you're right, the Cambrex business has been spread out quite a bit, and they don't have huge amounts going to a single customer anymore. Some really nice words coming from Christy Powell. Thank you. We really, really appreciate what you had to say. And, if you're going to send a check to the Mid-Michigan chapter, you can send it to 7076 Birchwood Avenue in Mount Morris, Morris, Michigan, 48458. And I'll tell you, we'd send you a big hug and a big thank you note. Anything you'd like to give us to help us continue our programs, we will take with open arms, and we will use it extremely wisely. I'll tell you that right now.
Does that mean you'll feed me?
I won't spend that money to feed you, Mark. I'll spend personal money to buy you and Wendy dinner. You just tell me the day, okay? Carol,
important.
Carol from Oklahoma, I think, wants to know, are REITs asset-based companies as well? Mark, can you answer that?
Yes. You build a pile of property and you charge people rent.
Okay, so a REIT would be an asset-based property as well, and most of them also are not growing as quickly as we would like a small company to grow, and therefore would be very unlikely to appear on this list then.
And Forbes definitely excluded them.
Right. So, Mark, I have cleared all the questions out. I think at this point, oh boy, did we have a nice audience this evening. I'm very pleased that all of you came. We hope you learned something, and our next turnout probably will not be until after the holidays. I think we'll take a short break in between November and December, but we'll certainly be back with a turnout after the holidays. We do have a roundtable coming up on the 21st of November, and we'd love to see most of you there. And as usual, my wife, Natalie, will be reminding you with a short email about the dates of the upcoming programs. Thank you all for coming. Mark, this was really enjoyable. I like doing this kind of thing, short and sweet and to the point. So why don't you say goodbye to everybody, and I'll say goodbye to everybody, and we'll close this thing down. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good hunting out there. Take care, everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving.